Hello, my name's Nicola Kemp and I'm editorial director of Creative Brief, and it's my absolute pleasure to host this discussion on Don't Mind the Gap, Close It. We are so lucky today because we have the phenomenal force for good that is Anna Whitehouse with us. And now Anna is founder of Mother Pukka, where she has successfully run the powerful and incredibly impactful and necessary Flex Appeal campaign, which fights for flexible working for everyone. She's a radio presenter at Global Radio, and she is quite simply relentless in her pursuit of progress and her campaigning for flexible working. So I can't think of anyone better to talk about closing the gap with. So the World Economic Forum's latest report reveals that it will take us 132 years to reach true gender parity at the current rate of change. And I'm not necessarily up for waiting that long. Anna, I'm not sure you are. I know the rest of the panel definitely aren't up for that 132-year rate.
No, I think we can shorten that somewhat with some immediate action within businesses today and tomorrow.
Excellent. And with that in mind, I really wanted to kick off firstly with a thank you, because you are relentless in the best way in your pursuit of closing the gap. But I'd love to hear about your own personal experience of gender discrimination and what really drives you to push to close that gap.
Well, I think everybody within any kind of activist space probably questions, am I the person to pipe up about this? And do you know what? I stopped overthinking it, because actually what it came down to was, can I raise my daughters for the same fall that I had? And the answer was no. So it came from a very primal, maternal, visceral place that I cannot and will not raise them to work hard in their ABCs, their GCSEs, their A levels, perhaps go to university, perhaps get their first job, have some kind of career trajectory, to have somebody in position going, as soon as, let's say, sperm hits ovary, you cannot continue. And so it was actually beyond my own personal story. It is about the future story of the next generation.
And that next generation, it's such an important point, because as part of your campaign, you've worked with a really diverse range of brands, and I'm just really painfully aware that we are on the cusp of this once in a generation opportunity to really reshape the workplace for the better, and perhaps take away some of those barriers that our generation might have felt in the workplace, coming back from maternity leave, or experiencing menopause in the workplace, or not being able to have that experience in the workplace. But the debate is still quite dominated by men with no caring responsibilities and no real stake in doing things differently. So I've got two really key questions for you. And the first one is really, what have been the key learnings that you've had from working with brands in terms of how you create that cultural change?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting to see that juncture pre-pandemic of the 23rd of March 2020, because I was speaking to a lot of businesses, a lot of brands prior to that, who were going, love what you do, but it won't work for us. And I think when that lockdown happened, it was very interesting to see what was indeed possible when cold, hard cash is at stake. And actually, if those companies hadn't zoomed in, as we are doing now, they would have actually had to shut down. So I think it was really interesting, the companies that had a head in the sand approach to flexibility, seemingly overnight in a 24-hour period, had no choice. And I think that's what it comes down to. The pandemic hasn't been this silver bullet for flexibility. If anything, it's made the conversation too binary, from, working from home versus working from office, when the majority of people seek the hybrid model. So you've got the sort of dinosaurs going back to the water cooler. Back to the water cooler we go. And on that note, I'm not entirely sure I've had a particularly great water cool experience to really be the pull to get me back to the office, or strapped, to your workstation at home, almost overworking. And those two extremes are where most people sit. Most people sit in the middle. So what I have garnered from the last 2 years, I'm not even going to mention Liz Truss scrapping gender pay gap reporting in the pandemic. I say that. I'm not going to mention it, 100% going to mention it. But I think what we've realized is that we've got a government that wants to build back better, right? The pandemic demolished the 9 to 5 overnight. But actually, I and many other brilliant organizations, Working Families, Pregnant Then Screwed, Fawcett Society, Trades Union Congress, all we want is to build back differently, actually. I'm not interested in the capitalist better. I'm interested in differently. And I think that's been the learning, is actually that I said, why did I raise my voice? It was for a very primal reason. But actually, everybody listening right now has a relevant voice in this discussion. So you ask what's going to change things culturally, it's you. It's me. It's not waiting for the government to change legislation. It is from somebody like Robert Reitbrook at PepsiCo, who just implemented a leaving loudly policy. It's very simple, but just say why you're leaving, whether you're online or whether you're in the office, unless obviously it's sort of a personal gynecological appointment. But feel free to personalize your workspace and your need for that time outside of that workspace, because, you know, culturally, what I'm breaking down, not single-handedly, there are a lot of us in this fight, is the fact that the current working world, the 9 to 5, was set up in the Industrial Revolution when men went out and got the bacon and women cooked it. That is not the case anymore. And we need culturally, legislatively, to break it down, rebuild it differently, not necessarily just better.
And that's so interesting, because there's a couple of points there that I think are really worth building on. Number one, that a lot of the barriers that we thought, or we were told, existed around flexibility actually only existed in our heads. Like the pandemic proved that a lot of the things, you know, like this hybrid panel, you know, there's a different way, there's a third way. And also this engaging the unengaged. And we were having a discussion as a panelist, you know, often these discussions are predominantly attended by women. And you mentioned Liz Truss. The other one to throw in is probably Sir Alan Sugar. I mean, how do we engage the unengaged, and how do we really create a kind of army of advocates? Because I think the pressure that comes for individual women when they become a proof point for an entire organization, often at a really pressurized point in their career, can be a bit much. So what's your advice there?
Well, I think to unpack Lord Sugar initially, you've got to look at his incentive, and that is that he has office space to fill. So it's within his interest to keep piping up, bleating on about everybody back to office. You look at the way the working from home headlines have run. If you think about the papers that need to sell and need footfall, they need people on the streets going to work to sell the papers. So why are we seeing so many working from home is terrible headlines? Look at the subtext, all of that. They need the money. They need to sell the magazines. He needs to fill his office space. You can almost eradicate a lot of that white noise. And what you can do individually, a very practical point, is the Equality and Human Rights Commission Working Forward Pledge. I would suggest, if you're in that pivotal juncture, whether you are a mother or not, this is not about women, this is about everybody seeking justified flexibility. I would suggest to your HR department to join, for your company to join the Equality and Human Rights Commission's Working Forward Pledge. So this states a belief in equality in the workplace. It states a belief in flexibility being the key to that equality. And it states a genuine belief and I think, transparency that your brand logo is on something, a manifesto for change. I think it'll be interesting if you're don't want to sign to equality way to go. But also just recognize your own voice. So HSC conversation around flexibility, they launched an internal podcast. They got the funding within the company, and then it became a necessity for each manager to listen to that podcast. I went on it as an external guest, And I thought, how brilliant is this? And I said, why did you set this up? They said, oh, we were just hacked off with this inconsistency of flexibility within our company. And so we thought, can we actually get this conversation into one place? These weren't managers, CEOs, CFOs. These were assistants. They were there was one administrative assistant who thought there's a better way of working. It's not about stature within a company, it's about belief that there is a better, more productive, that's the key, more productive way of working. And I think don't underestimate your voice in this, but I do also realize in those moments of vulnerability, pregnancy, menopause being there, that also you might need support and you might not have the fight in you. And I would suggest ringing the Working Families Free Legal Helpline. I think there are two sides to this coin. If you've got the fight in you, raise your voice. If you are broken, like I was when I got pushed out of the workforce, I think seek the support you can for yourself, because in fighting that battle for yourself, you're paving the way for others, other mothers, other parents behind you.
And I think that's been such a strong theme within the panel as well, in terms of a real desire to shift the workplace for everyone, and the positives that can come for flexible working for everyone. And I just wondered, from your personal experience, because one of the themes that came up is that actually sometimes you'll have younger women in the workplace who will perhaps have looked at your experience and answered the question, is this workplace for me, with a no, because of your experience of flexible working being denied. I mean, do you think, because we talk so much about the war for talent, but then when you look at the numbers, you look at the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on women, and you think, is there still more to be done, like in the HSBC example, of telling stories that really change this narrative that flexibility is a concession, rather than flexibility being the way to really empower your staff and build your business and attract and retain the best talent?
Yeah, I think just in terms of companies seeking talent, I think the key word is inclusion. So instead of it being seen as flexible working, inclusive working, I try not to use flexible working anymore, because that puts too much of an onus on businesses, when actually, do you want to include at the table a variety of individuals who you're ultimately going to sell your product to? So do you want to have the understanding of that homogenous lump of people from all walks of life, who will understand the sales nuance and needs of your consumer? It's that simple. If you want to have this, right, we're just going to sell to this tiny little group of people, that's just who we're going to keep selling to, and we're not going to open up our financial horizons, then fine, continue as you are. Don't put a diversity and inclusion officer at the helm just to make yourselves look good. That's for you. But actually the companies, it's not even about talent, it's just about money. It is about making sure, so the biggest report of its kind from the Peterson Institute found that across 92 countries, 2,842 businesses, if you have 30% or more women at the top, you just make more money, higher profitability. That is the biggest study of its kind. This isn't just some quick throwaway, clickbait stat. It is fact in front of any CEO driving their business forward. Lord Sugar, I'm talking to you about inclusion. Are you including not just women, but those who are disabled, those who have perhaps a mother with Alzheimer's who just needs to have a cottage pie on a Wednesday, and that keeps her week anchored, and you are working with someone who is a primary carer of that woman? Look at the nuance, look at the detail. Don't go, well, this is what we do for parents, this is what we do for the mummies, this is what we do for those who are disabled. No, stop with that. Break it down and actually say, how can we include everyone, from accessibility to the office if you have a wheelchair, from parental leave, from making sure that parental leave is equal, it's not just weighed on female shoulders, flexibility for everyone. Stop pegging it to female shoulders, because by doing that, you are again just excluding talent, because there are Gen Zers who are not willing to do this 9 to 5 slog. So you're losing out however you look at it. So I think it's more about inclusion than flexibility and talent almost. Just going to take.
Oh, it's nice to have a bit of sunshine though.
No.
Like, it's still summer. But with the whole challenge really of closing the gap, and really particularly for the creative industries, because there has been a real disproportionate impact of women in the pandemic. And the other trend that is concerning is speaking to women across the creative industries is a bit of a post-pandemic creative crisis of confidence. And if we want to close the gap, one of the things that has really come up, and when I spoke to Sue Higgs, the executive creative director of Dentsu, who's also on the panel, and I said, what would you like the one takeaway for the audience to be? And it was quite powerful. She was just stay. You know, those pinch points in your career where you feel, I'm not sure if I can get over this hurdle, or I can see through this fog. And let's face it, the pandemic brought a lot of fog. I really wondered, what's your view? I mean, how can we build a bridge collectively over this gap for the next generation of talent, and also just be honest about some of the challenges that lie ahead?
Yeah, I think it's it's a hulking great hole of inequality, isn't it? I mean, if you look at all the gaps, you've got the pleasure gap, you've got the pensions gap, you've got the gender pay gap. I think it's coming down to, I know it's overused, and I feel like it's overused to the extent that I think people don't understand what it means anymore. But allyship is the only way through. And I think you say that and there's a sort of half sigh of like, oh, I've got to be an ally again. It's an exhausted weight of responsibility again. But actually coming back to why I piped up in the first place, it wasn't for me, it was for my daughters. So think beyond your own needs and actually think, do I want my daughter to, who I'm, let's say, raising, I'm building up, telling her she can do anything, be anyone. Do I want somebody like me to be in a position to squash her at the most vulnerable point of her life? And I think in terms of allyship, let's be honest about biology, why we don't recognize these key biological junctures that happen to women that don't happen to men. This isn't a man bashing exercise. It is a simple statement of Mother Nature fact that women, you know, hormonally going through pregnancy, it's going to have more of an impact on them and their presence within the office, because raising a human, quite simply physically growing a human, is an extraordinary task. That is not to exempt men from stepping up to the plate and supporting, but I think businesses need to have full recognition and understanding. I'm doing a panel for Tommy's next week with key MPs and stakeholders in the miscarriage conversation. So an understanding that when a woman, and I was that woman, I was miscarrying at my desk for fear of telling my employer that I was miscarrying, because I thought, God, they're going to know I'm trying, which might mean it will impact my promotion or my career progression. Because say if I can't get pregnant and then they know I'm trying, and so I'm red flag across my head. And I think it's that recognition that no woman should be sitting at her desk bleeding, losing a baby, for fear of her career being stunted. That is the most sort of brutal example I can give, and I'm not alone in saying that. So, you know, these things happen to women, and I think we need EQ. Accenture lead with EQ now as well as IQ when they recruit managers. I think the key conversation here is a recognition of biology and emotional intelligence. And this is how managers can't just have this blanket approach for everyone. Oh, God, well, you know, we did that for her, so we have to do that for her. No, communicate, like Birmingham Women's Hospital trialed ward-led rostering recently as a pilot, which is essentially giving nurses the power to organise their own roster. So then they tell the matron, by the way, I've swapped with Julie on this day, or Bob's working Friday appointment, whatever it is, frees up the matron's time so she can get on with her job. And actually then her role there is they're sorting out the practical bits, and it's empowering them to work harder together. She can then lean in on an EQ level and recognize what are the individual needs now. And this isn't some pandering snowflake conversation. I think that's what those are words that are often used to dismiss the very real need to recognize that Mother Nature's biggest task is ultimately raising a child, having a child, raising a child, losing a child, and then losing your ability to have a child. They are things that happen to women and don't happen to men. And I think EQ needs to be at the heart of that. And I think managers need to recognize that they can lead on a case-by-case, individual basis, because no one person's, not just women's, experience is going to be the same as the next. And it's down to them to communicate that to the team in a way that feels right culturally for that team. But at the moment, as it stands, it's just, oh, well, we can't give flexibility to you because it will open the floodgates to everyone. Well, the people are drowning behind the floodgates. Let's look at each person and see what we can do.
Thank you for sharing so openly about that brutal experience and really normalizing that conversation, because I think one of the things that's so interesting and important about this debate is so many of these things have happened in silence. They haven't really been talked about, and we've normalized some really, really kind of brutal behaviors. But I love the example of the empowerment of just creating your own rosters, of really having that autonomy and recognizing that there's not like a one size fits all solution. And one of the really interesting things that came up in the discussion is really that having a fulfilling career, especially having a fulfilling creative career, sometimes demands giving one thing your full attention. And in our conversation prior to the panel, one of the things that really came up was the sort of amount of time that perhaps we're collectively wasting, that we could be spending on closing the gap by over-explaining, over-apologizing, overcompensating, over-scheduling. And I just really wondered if there's women in the audience, or men, anyone in the audience really, that are struggling right now and struggling in their personal journey to close that gap. What would be your advice to kind of really make the space to have the conversations that matter, to raise some of these issues, to find their voice? What would be your advice?
So this is a case study more than personal experience or advice really tied to any kind of research, but I think it's probably the most human case study in this situation. Obviously, not everyone's a manager, but I'm hoping anyone listening here has access to a manager, has access to HR to give feedback. And I think it was a guy, he was the chief people officer at Coutts Bank, which is a traditionally quite sort of white collar industry. And you would think very sort of emasculating to consider any kind of flexibility. And that was historically how it was. But he decided to give flexibility to his 40-strong team. And I say give, it's not like a little bonus ball or a nice to have, but obviously within the context and the reality of most working places, it's still a work in progress. However much people are putting the press releases out about their new flexible working policies, there's still a lot of work to be done. And all he did was gave his team 10 minutes each, and he looked in their faces, in their eyes, and just said, what is the rub in your day? What's the stuff that really stresses you out? And it was different for every single person. And it ranged from, I'm so stressed I can't pick up my children at 3:15. Like, I hate them being in after school clubs 5 days a week. Just 2 days a week would change my life, that I could then log on later. Fine, do that. Next person. Okay, I get really anxious on the tube to commute into work at like 9 o'clock. 10 o'clock's a much better start time for me, and I'm happy to stay a bit later, or however you want to work. Somebody said, to be honest, it's working from home for me, like to be able to cuddle my kids at bedtime, like that's all I want. And these really human stories of your employees. And he said most people just I get quite emotional thinking about it, because it's business, right? But these are the people running your business. So if they are disengaged, discontented, unhappy, disconnected from their environment, how are you going to get the best out of them? And so all he did was ask that question, and in return, what happened in that department was productivity went up 30% in 3 months. 30%. And he got called in. He was described initially as going rogue. And that's how it's seen, isn't it? Somebody who shifts things in the way that we're used to having them, especially in an environment like that, is seen as going rogue. And I think my advice to anyone listening right now is go rogue, is to lead with that eccentric example of emotional intelligence. Be intelligent about this. Stop being a cog in a hulking great 9-to-5 machine. Break out of it for the good of your business. Take risks in that sense. Suggest to your manager other ways of working. There's so much out there. Like I said, Working Families, Pregnant Then Screwed, Fawcett Society, Trades Union Congress. TimeWise has case studies ready to go to email your HR department. This is how it could be. And I think it's accountability, really, each and every one of us taking a little glimmer of hope from that example, where going rogue really does pay off for both employee and employer.
I love that example so much. And as you were talking, I was thinking about all the headlines around quiet quitting. And essentially what he's done is exactly the opposite. He's lasered in and really listened, and actively listened. Thank you so much for your time, your insight, your wisdom, and your relentless campaigning. I can't think of a better time to do it, or a more necessary time for having it. So thank you so much.
It's been such a pleasure. And anyone wants to know any more, you can just go to my Instagram at mother_Pukka, but also there's a flex tab on our website, motherpukka.co.uk. And there you can get all of our latest reports. Flex Forever, which is our Flex Beyond a Pandemic report. This is the stuff to send to your HR departments. This is the tangible research information you can literally forward on and go, have you seen this? And that's how we can create change, regardless of what role you have in a company.
Brilliant. Thank you.
you.